Here on this channel, we talk about a lot of RPG horror stories, and sometimes I focus a lot on DM horror stories, because in my opinion, those are the ones that can get really out of hand. After all, the DM is often the person in control of the narrative, at least to some degree, and the DM is the person that facilitates the game itself. The DM also has this perception of power that exists within a D&D group, and that dynamic can create problems. It's especially important for the DM to be responsible with how they run their game. But, obviously, it's called problem player for a reason. We have seen plenty of problem players throughout all of our horror stories. They are a constant, just like problem DMs. After all, it's not really anything to do with the roles themselves, it's just sometimes rough people play these games and have behaviors that aren't exactly ideal. So today, we're going to be going over some problem players. Not really players specifically, but their characters instead. Let's see the worst tropes we can find in Dungeons & Dragons and TTRPGs in general, and learn what not to do when making our characters for our gaming groups. Without further ado, let's get started. Alright, first up, remember that one guy who played a chaotic evil drow slash halfling slash tiefling rogue who at every possible point would attempt to steal from the other players and then complained when the players took offense to this? That guy. Don't be that guy. Now, we've got a couple things here. First and foremost, hostile player behavior. Now, this is not me saying that you can't have conflict between player characters. I think conflict between player characters can be cool. We've had plenty of it in my own home game. Now, it's mostly played for laughs, but occasionally some more serious stuff does come up at our table, and I am happy with that, and so are my players. Our characters sometimes don't get along. Players not getting along with each other, players not getting along with NPCs, that's natural, it happens. However, it's when it starts bleeding into out-of-character behavior and out-of-character feelings when it really becomes a problem. And you don't necessarily need to be a jerk out of character in order to create this problem. I mean, strictly speaking, this rogue that the OP is talking about, they're doing in-game stuff, they're stealing in-game items, at least I assuming. However, it doesn't matter. In-game behavior can be seen as outwardly hostile if you're being annoying enough. And frankly, I don't blame people for being annoyed if somebody attacks their character for no reason or steals super important magical items. We just read an RPG horror story about somebody selling a super plot-relevant item and then making fun of the party for being upset about that. Even though that's something that's perfectly reasonable to be annoyed about because somebody is going behind your back and being a general jerk. You need to handle in-game behavior, especially hostile in-game behavior, with a degree of care. And when people are starting to get annoyed about in-game behavior, talk about it and listen to those people. Listen to their reasoning for why something that you're doing is irritating, especially if you are doing it constantly. Constantly stealing from the party might work in some groups, but in the vast majority of groups, it's not gonna land the way you think it's gonna land, right? Make sure that you check up on how your behavior affects others, whether it be in-game or, more importantly, out-of-game. A guy who named his fighter and was on his phone unless combat was taking place. A classic case of I don't care syndrome. Now, this is something that we often don't see on our show, but it is something that is absolutely legit. It absolutely happens. I have absolutely seen it. Not to this degree. I mean, everyone I know names their characters something, but people who just aren't vibing with the game, who are there just to hang out with their friends, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing ever, but it is a problem for Dungeons & Dragons. You can't just check out of a D&D game. You have to be engaged, at least to a degree, in the vast majority of campaigns. If someone invites you to a multi-year-long story, and you're just there to be on your phone, it's really going to take the rest of the players, and especially the Dungeon Master, out of the experience. That is horribly detrimental behavior for the game. D&D and a lot of TTRPGs, they require engagement a lot of the time. Again, maybe not every time. There are some beer and pretzels games where this sort of thing would be fine, but if you're gonna play D&D, you need to play D&D, and just being on your phone the whole time, unless you're doing something that involves rolling dice, is not ideal at all. Engagement is important for these games, and a lack of engagement means you're probably not going to be very into the experience, and if you're not into it, that's perfectly fine to just hang out with your friends in a different way. Have a player that refuses to go with the group / splits off whenever possible, has a high charisma / persuasion, and reminds us at every opportunity she can talk her way out of situations. Tries to use persuade on almost every NPC, but roleplays poorly. Skill monkey bard / rogue with a crap ton of cantrips, but chooses to use crossbows on red dragons, tries to control every situation, and pouts when things don't go her way. The one thing I generally don't mind is somebody who can't roleplay but has high persuasion. Look, at the end of the day, you don't need to swing a sword in order to attack the wizard. You don't need to actually be very charismatic in order to roll persuasion. Now, I do like it when my players roleplay. I do like it when my players at least think about how they're persuading this NPC. But as long as they give me something to work off of, I'm okay with just accepting the roll. If they give me a great argument, hell, I'm going to let them roll an advantage. I like rewarding that kind of roleplay. However, I'm not going to punish my players if they, stumble over their words when they're trying to be charismatic. The rest of that, though, yeah, this is annoying. Especially the controlling the party thing. Look, persuasion, charisma skills in general, they are not mind control. You can't just roll persuasion to get everyone to do what you want. It is especially annoying to me when players roll without my consent as the dungeon master. I need to give my assent in order for you to roll. That is a rule at my table and a rule at the majority of tables. I hate it when players roll and then say, I rolled a 27 to persuasion. They can just do whatever I say, right? No, that's not how it works. I need to okay the roll first. This player is trying to use that persuasion and that argument of a persuasive character to also control the rest of the players, which is absolutely not allowed. In fact, this is a personal thing, but at my tables, I generally do not allow for mind control spells to be used on other players unless that other player gives consent first. It's just a personal thing. I get that not every table is going to be that hardcore about it, but I really don't like it when people are trying to control other characters, and using persuasion to try to do that, it's dumb on multiple levels. Also, use your dang cantrips. My god, you can use them as much as you want. I mean, I know in Baldur's Gate 3, that game for some reason makes me miss my cantrips 100% of the time, and even when I hit, I do 1 damage. But look, that is beside the point. The actual point is that in the actual D&D game, cantrips are really great. You should probably use them every once in a while instead of a light crossbow that does non-magical damage. Come on. In the game I'm running right now, one of my player characters is a wizard, and he's based his character off of Doctor Strange. Magic is dangerous, and shouldn't be in the hands of people who will use it for ill. So he is hoarding all of the magic items. Mind if I roll need? A classic loot hog, my god. I saw these things in World of Warcraft way before I ever played Dungeons & Dragons in 2015, and yeah, they're annoying no matter what game you are trying to play. As a dungeon master, talking to a loot hog is extremely important. In fact, talking to all these people is extremely important. I just want to point that out. But with a loot hog, I think the conversation is the most succinct, because I think this behavior is mostly born out of a single player mentality. A lot of people jump to D&D from video games. In fact, I know for a fact a ton of people are going to jump to D&D from Baldur's Gate 3. I'm certain of that. So that single player mentality is going to carry over sometimes, but that's not ideal, right? D&D isn't a single player game. It's a multiplayer game. You're playing with other people, literally at a table with you, and therefore you can't be a loot hog because it's going to get really annoying for everyone around you. Now, of course, I saw this first in World of Warcraft, an explicitly multiplayer game, so clearly there's a lot of people who just don't care about sharing. But as a dungeon master, you need to put this behavior 6 feet under very, very quickly. Stick it in the vacant and forget about it, because good god, it is not a good idea to let this fester. I know I went a little bit hardcore there, but I'm trying to emphasize my point. What I mean by getting it done quickly isn't necessarily kicking out this player. It is telling them, hey, this behavior is not okay. Some DMs will try to handle this by, loot starving the player, but that's not a good idea. If anything, that's going to make them more vindictive in their loot hogginess. Talk to them and tell them straight up, look, not all the loot is meant for you. Some of it is meant for other players, and that is what makes this game fun. A life cleric who was a pacifist makes sense if he doesn't want to hurt people, but he then refused to heal anyone who had hurt someone. If you've watched my channel before, you might have seen a really old Q&A where I said straight up that I don't think a pacifist character would work at my games. However, if you've watched Shadow over Karakonos, my actual play D&D podcast, you would know that one of the characters there was a pacifist in some ways. He didn't want to kill any sort of humanoid intelligent beings. In fact, he didn't want to kill any intelligent beings unless they were evil Lovecraftian entities bent on summoning a creature of the void. He very often went out of his way to spare other creatures. And you know what? As a character, He worked just fine. I applied the Dishonored mentality. If you don't know, Dishonored is a video game where you can eliminate enemies in one of two ways. You can either kill them, which is slightly easier, or you can choke them out and spare them, taking them out non-lethally. I applied this to Dungeons & Dragons, requiring a simple strength check to choke out enemies after reducing them to super low hit points, so that this character wouldn't have to kill his enemies. I think a pacifist character can work, but you do need to okay it with the Dungeon Master first, because if you don't, it can be really obnoxious in combat-heavy games, which, let's be honest, a lot of D&D games are combat-heavy. It's a combat-based system, and playing a pacifist character might get irritating for the other players around you, especially if you, as the cleric, are refusing to heal the fighter for defending himself after being stabbed in the jugular by a goblin. We had a Blade Singer wizard that refused to take any defensive spells and would just charge into the middle of any fray and get KO'd as soon as the bad guys took a turn. Oh, also, she said that the class must be broken, and I recommend taking spells like Mage Armor and Shield, and she said she wanted to do damage. Oof. Look, I don't think every character needs to be optimized, but, and I know I say this a lot, but not everyone watches my videos, so I've got to say it again. I do run a very, not necessarily hardcore game, but a game where combat is meant to be pretty difficult. And doing this is going to get you killed in my games, straight up. And frankly, if you complain about it, I'm not going to feel very bad for you. That's just how the game is played sometimes. If you make stupid decisions, you're going to be punished for it. That's like what makes D&D fun in a way. You need to make smart choices with both your choices during the actual combat, but also your character building choices. Now again, not every game is going to require an optimized character. I think games where the combat is very easy or maybe even non-existent, I think that can be valid. However, if you're playing a game where death is possible, you need to think about the choices that you're making. And if you don't do that, do not complain to the Dungeon Master and blame them or the game design for what is going wrong with your playstyle. You made those choices, and now you have to live with them. Now, I, as a DM, am perfectly okay with my players changing out spells or cantrips or whatnot, even if the book wouldn't technically allow it, because again, I run combat that's pretty difficult, and if a player makes a decision like that, I think I'm okay with it as long as they're not doing it all the time. I'm okay with players trading out spells every once in a while, especially since playing a homebrew revision, and therefore rules are going to be constantly changing, and my players might want to pick different options. Essentially what I'm trying to say is make a character that fits what you are trying to do at the game, what your DM is trying to do with their table. Ask the DM what kind of combat they're running, and then build your character appropriately. And if you build them in a way that is not appropriate, talk to the DM about it, and hey, maybe you might want to change up those choices. Who knows? Might work out for you. Finally, Kisumi, the Hweeb Dragonborn Sorcerer. Not so much the worst character as it was the worst player. Now, apparently this woman had a serious problem with playing an anime-based character in caricatures that were not great. And we've seen this before. In fact, I get asked about this a lot, and I have been struggling to figure out a great answer to this question because a lot of people ask me, hey Crispy, how do you play characters that are not like you? Of course, this is mostly focused on players, not necessarily dungeon masters, but I get it. You want to focus on an aspect of the character that makes them different or unique from yourself.
Anybody want to ask about the chair? Go ahead and get that out of the way. Anybody? I thought it would be fairly impolite.
However, doing it in this way makes it somewhat, for lack of a better word, forced. It feels almost self-serving. Describe characters that are different from you, just like you would describe any other character. They're not objects that just happen to be lesbian or happen to be in a wheelchair. They're people just like you are. How would you describe yourself? You know, how would you describe the way you look, the way you conduct yourself, the clothes that you wear? Use that mentality to describe everyone in your world, whether you're a player or a DM, and I guarantee you, you will have a much more diverse and interesting world for your players to explore. I love introducing my characters to all different types of people throughout the world of Eris, and they've had such a fun time interacting with this cast of NPCs that I've put in front of them. I think that that sort of thing can be shared by everyone. And the fact that so many people are asking me about this, it really does warm my heart. I wish you all luck in creating amazing rosters of NPCs or amazing characters for you to play as in your D&D game, whether or not they are exactly like you. Alright guys, and that's it for today's episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips. If you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our RPG Horror Story series, where we cover the best of the worst of TTRPGs and Dungeons & Dragons. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment different from you. Tell them, if you can't think of a comment, leave the comment a bit of a problem. To let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.